Houston, we have a problem. I'm 8 hours away from being ready to use this dough, and it already looks like this. Let's get it back into shape.
Hi, and welcome to Modernist Pizza. My name is Paul, and today we're going to talk about how long you should proof your dough. If you try to use your dough too early, the result is bad. If you try to use your dough too late, the result is too bad. But what are the elements that determine the perfect time for your dough to ferment? We're going to take a look at it today for Neapolitan pizza dough. We're going to do some other types of dough in future videos, and we're going to pull a lot from several different sources, including the Disciplinare from the Associazione Vera Pizza Napoletana. We're going to pull from Modernist Pizza, and we're going to pull from La Pizza Napoletana. I've spoken of all three of them in previous videos, so take a look at some of my other videos if you're not familiar with those sources. There are several key factors that determine the ideal fermentation time. We're going to focus in on Neapolitan pizza today, and we're going to focus in on the direct method. La Pizza Napoletana and Modernist Pizza are two great books, and they have very different approaches to this. Now, La Pizza Napoletana is much closer to the association's recommendations and really the definition of a true Neapolitan pizza dough. However, if you're like me, what you're really interested in is getting a great result. So we're going to bend the rules a little bit, but we're going to take one set of dough and prepare it the way that Modernist Pizza proposes, and we're going to take another set of dough and prepare it the way La Pizza Napoletana recommends it. In Neapolitan pizza dough, you have 4 ingredients. Modernist Pizza adds a 5th, which I don't agree with. The 4 ingredients are flour, water, yeast, and salt. Each of these ingredients can affect the amount of time it takes for your dough to leaven. Let's start with the obvious one, yeast. Most pizzaioli I've met actually put way too much yeast in their dough. But if you're trying to get your dough to be ready earlier, you don't have enough time to go through a recommended leavening process, then you can use yeast to speed it up. Salt affects the dough in a couple of different ways, but it really doesn't have a large effect. If you put in enough salt to slow down the leavening process of the pizza, it's really going to make the pizza salty, and you'll notice the difference. So I don't think we're going to go that way. If you pull out too much salt, then you're also probably not going to like the taste of your dough. Finally, the water is probably the ingredient that has the most effect other than the amount of yeast you use. And it's not the amount of water, but the temperature of the water that you start with. This applies to the flour too, although to a lesser extent. But the water itself, if you start with a very low temperature water, that's going to lengthen out the amount of time you need to leaven your dough. If you start with a hot water, you may actually kill the yeast. Typically, you want your water to be at room temperature. In my case, I put the tap in the middle when I pull the water out, and that seems to work just fine, right around that 75 to 80 degree mark. That seems to be perfect. In addition to the ingredients that we have, there are a couple of more drivers of the amount of time that it takes, and this is going to affect our pizza today. So I'm in Texas, it's middle of September, it's 6 o'clock at night, and it's still 92 degrees outside. And that's pretty typical. We keep our house at about 78 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's a little bit warmer than the recommended proofing temperature for Neapolitan dough.
As you can see, I'm mixing my dough by hand rather than using a mixer or a dough machine. This whole process takes about 20 minutes. I'll skip over a little bit of it, but you can see that it does provide quite a workout when you're mixing your dough this way. I like it because it gives me a lot of control. The window pane test tells me that this dough is pretty much ready to roll. As you can see, it doesn't break, it doesn't snap, and you can't quite see it here, but you can almost see through it. The dough has been rising after that window pane test for about an hour, and I'm splitting it up into 2 pieces so you can see I'm making dough balls with one of the sides, and then the other side I put in to raise by itself.
It's about 12 hours since we made the dough, and we woke up to a bit of a disappointing surprise because it is way overproofed. Those air bubbles are just not acceptable. So we're going to do what's called dough CPR. Either the heat was just more than I expected. There was too much yeast. My scale is supposed to go to 1 gram, but I'm really starting to suspect that maybe that was just too much. I should have used a ½ gram or something.
The association actually calls for between 0.1 gram and 3 grams of yeast, but there we're talking about cake yeast, and that yeast is about 3 times heavier because of the water content than the dry yeast that I find in the US, at least in Texas. So at the most, 1 gram would be sufficient. Given the extra heat and the amount of time that I was using, I would probably want to cut that in half to be about a ½ gram. So the math here works out. There was probably a little too much yeast in my pizza, and I don't think the scale was accurate down to a single gram. I may have had as much as 2 grams of yeast in there, so this may be the real culprit of the problem.
We're gonna take these dough balls and fold them over and put them to reproof, and then we're also going to do the same thing with the bulk fermentation dough because it has the same problem. It has these huge bubbles in it. Not quite as bad. We'll take a slightly different road. For these are going to go into the refrigerator after I do the CPR. We'll pull them out afterwards. I'll still have like 4 or 5 hours before I need to use them. But this one here, I'm just going to do the folding and then leave it at room temperature. And hopefully we'll be able to recover both of these without too much trouble.
I apologize for the bad shot on this, but essentially I'm flattening the dough balls or discs into squares and then folding the corners in and pulling them up like a balloon to make a ball. And I'm using essentially the same process with the large lump of dough, pulling it together to make a ball. It's about 3 hours before go time, and I'm checking the dough with a fingertip test, and you can tell it's not quite there yet because the indentation stays in a little too long. 3 hours later, the pizzas are about ready to go into the oven, and I'm just doing a final fingertip test. The dough's still a little sticky, but I've worked with worse, and this is going to really make some great pizza. You can see how nice and airy it is. So let's start a fire and get these bad boys in the oven. Starting with the dough that we made using the traditional fermentation method, the direct method, where the dough actually ferments in bulk really for only about 10 minutes to 2 hours. In our case, it was about an hour. You can see this dough is really nice to work with. It's soft, it is very extensible, but it doesn't break easily. And as I pull it, you can see that the dough just makes a nice round shape pretty quickly. I only have to work it a couple of times. The next dough ball I'm working with was using the Modernist method, where we let it bulk ferment for about 12 hours. And then I had it in the refrigerator for about 2 hours because we saw that it was over fermented. Then 3 hours before go time, we divided it up into balls and let it ferment as individual balls for about 3 hours. And this dough is also nice and light. It's a little less elastic than the other dough, but it really kind of works out great. And I had a hard time in the end telling the two apart, either when I was working the dough or making the pizzas. They both made really fantastic pizzas. So yes, I know putting the dough on the peel before dressing the pizza is really not ideal. I do it for a number of reasons, none of which are technical, all of which have to do more with family politics, but that's the way we do it. And the key is to do it really quickly. So I try to get that into the oven about a minute or a minute and a half after I've started putting it on the peel. I noticed afterwards, and I could actually tell in the taste of this pizza, that I forgot to add the oil after adding the mozzarella to it. But oh well. And now I'm on the quick run out to the oven through the back door. I do one final stop at the grill just next to the oven. And what you'll see is me stretching out the pizza to making sure it's about the right time. I had a little too much flour on the pizza that went in before this one, and it left just a tiny bit of soot, so I brushed that out of the oven. Here, I'm stretching the pizza on the peel. This also helps me make sure that it's not stuck to the peel, and this particular pizza had no problem at all. And as you can see, it goes into the oven nicely. Thanks for sticking with us to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video and got something out of it. If you did, please give us a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of the same, then please hit that subscribe button. Look forward to seeing you next time.